If you watch any sort of MMA media, you know that steroid accusations are thrown around all the time. And it makes sense, right? The UFC is the best fighting organization in the entire world, but the most competitive fighters in the entire world. So of course it makes sense that some of these guys are going to do whatever it takes to be the best. And that includes taking performance-enhancing drugs. I feel like to the people who watch MMA and consume MMA media, it's just kind of common knowledge that most of these guys are on something. But then I ask myself, if these guys are on something, then why aren't more UFC champions testing positive for steroids? I mean, look at Bilal Muhammad. The dude went through a complete second puberty at the age of like 30, and I've never heard any news about him testing positive. Or the same thing with Marab. I mean, you really don't get that freakishly insane cardio without taking something. Or Volkanovski. I mean, look at how unbelievably jacked he looks right now. And in this video, I'm going to talk about a lot of people who I think might be doing steroids. Just know, that's not me trying to insult these fighters or take a hit at their integrity. The way I see it is it's just part of the sport. But there are so many guys who, it seems pretty clear to me, have got to be taking some sort of banned substance. And yet, they haven't tested positive, or if they have, we haven't heard about it, and I want to know why. And in this video, I'm going to take a deep dive into it. I researched the organizations responsible for doing drug tests for the UFC, and I've learned as much as I can about them for this video, including reading their entire drug policies, which I bet none of you have. So keep watching for some interesting information. Now, if I'm using my common sense and just kind of know with intuition that some of these guys have to be on steroids, but they're not testing positive, well, what conclusions can I jump to? Conclusion number one, I once heard that if a UFC fighter tests positive, the information does not have to be publicly announced. However, that rumor turns out to be false. If you go to article 14.3.2 on the UFC's anti-doping policy, no later than 20 days after a decision has been rendered in a hearing in accordance with Article 8, or the right to a hearing has been waived, or the assertion of an anti-doping policy violation has not been timely challenged, UFC shall publicly report the disposition of the matter, including the anti-doping policy violated, the name of the athlete committing the violation, the prohibited substance or prohibited method involved, if any, and the consequences imposed. All this essentially means is that 20 days after a fighter's hearing, which a fighter will get a hearing if they do test positive to potentially argue against the charges, then the UFC has 20 days to publicly report this. And the UFC publicly reports this right here at www.ufcantidoping.com. And the information has to be left there for either 1 month or the duration period of ineligibility of the fighter. Now, we're just scratching the tip of the iceberg here, but throughout this video, you're going to see a lot of things that just seem kind of a little bit convenient for the UFC, and this one is the first. Why do these results only stay public for 1 month or the bare minimum amount of time? When I was researching this video, I was trying to find fighters who have failed drug tests in the past, but there's no official record for it anywhere. Why wouldn't we have public record of fighters who have failed drug tests? And if not, what for? There's records of fighters who took drug tests. We know exactly how many times each fighter has been drug tested this year, but we don't know if they've passed the test, if they failed the test. We don't know anything about it. And it just makes it a little bit weird how the results go away kind of as soon as possible. It makes it kind of annoying, especially for research for this video. For example, I've heard people say that Islam Makhachev was once popped for some sort of substance. However, there's no public record of that. There's only some news sources with sometimes conflicting information. Why isn't there one centralized public place where this information can be laid out? If you're going to go so far as to show every single fighter who's been drug tested and how often they've been drug tested, you might as well put the results of the drug test right there. And if the result is pending, you can say the result's pending. But there's no reason for them to not put it there. I'm just saying there's a lot of things that have come up that just seem a little bit convenient. Under Article 14.4, Statistical Reporting, it states, UFC may publish general statistical reports of its doping-controlled activities. UFC may also publish reports showing the name of any athletes tested and the date of each testing. Now, this doesn't make sense to me, because why would it not include the results of the test? If a fighter fails a drug test, we should know. It's not something that should be hidden from us, or something that should be hidden from public record. And just to be clear, I totally understand the UFC doing its due diligence and making sure that if there is a failed drug test, it's not a fluke, it wasn't a mistake, because I know sometimes these drug test results can be kind of in gray areas, but there's no reason at all for none of this information to be available to us. And as I'm recording this video, I feel like we're getting a little bit sidetracked here. This video is supposed to be about the techniques the fighters use to avoid testing positive, but I'm starting to think that there might be more to this. There might be some things that the UFC isn't letting us in on. I did not plan this video with the intention of going down a crazy conspiracy. I thought this video was going to be me analyzing drug tests and methods to get around them, and we'll get there, don't worry. But to me, the first logical step was understanding exactly what the UFC drug policy states, and there's just some weird things coming up that I cannot ignore. For example, if you're scrolling through the drug policy, you might notice Article 9, intentionally omitted. Huh, that's interesting. Why have an article if you're just going to intentionally omit it? There's a full-on article that the public just cannot read. We don't know what it says. We actually have no idea anything about what it means. But let's continue. Maybe that's just, a one-time little thing. Article 11, Article 12, and Article 13, all intentionally omitted. Look, these drug policies are not my area of expertise, right? But I really don't know why we're intentionally omitting these articles from the public. What is it they don't want us to know? Even though this is clearly very weird, once again, drug policies are not my area of expertise, so why not look at some of the other sports and see if they have omitted articles just like the UFC? Well, let's take a look at the NFL's drug policy. If you scroll through it, you will find nothing omitted. Everything is available to the public. You can even control F omitted, nothing comes up. Well, what about MLB for Major League Baseball? Well, once again, you can scroll through it, nothing's omitted. Just double check, control F, nothing is omitted. What about the NHL? The NHL actually does have some omitted sections. However, the difference is they have omitted sub-articles. For example, their 13.15 is omitted. However, for the UFC, they have entire articles like 11, 12, and 13 entirely omitted. It does help the UFC's case a little bit, but it's still a little bit strange how the UFC has multiple full articles that are omitted. To put this all in perspective, the UFC has 23 articles in its drug testing, and 6 of them are omitted. That's over a quarter of the entire UFC drug policy that the public just has no idea what it says. All this is interesting, and I can say it's convenient, but I can't prove anything. I can't prove that the UFC knows their athletes are on steroids and are letting them fight anyways. I can't prove that, and I'm not here to prove that. I'm just pointing out a few things that I think are a little bit convenient. This makes the rest of the video pretty challenging, because it's going to be hard to not just say that there's some sort of conspiracy going on with the UFC just because there's so many limited details to the public. But back to the original point of the video, I'm trying to figure out how these fighters are getting around the drug tests. Article 2.1.3.2 states, for those prohibited substances for which a decision concentration level is specifically identified in the UFC prohibited list, if both athletes' A and B samples are at or above the applicable decision concentration level, then such presence shall constitute an anti-doping policy violation. Essentially what this is saying is that for some substances, as long as you're not above the concentration, then you're okay. For example, if you go and look at the UFC's prohibited substances list, the compound dihydrochloromethyltestosterone, or more commonly known as turinabol, has a maximum concentration rate of 0.1 nanograms per milliliter. So essentially, if turinabol is found in your urine sample you gave at above this concentration, then that is considered testing positive. But if it's below that concentration, then it's okay. Now you might be thinking, well, why don't you just take a little bit under the concentrated dose, and then you can be okay? Well, you have to understand a few things. First off, a nanogram is incredibly small. A nanogram is 10 to the negative 9 grams. According to this old bodybuilding forum, the standard dose of turinabol is around 20 to 30 milligrams. A milligram is 10 to the negative 3 grams. A nanogram is 10 to the negative 9 grams. That's a huge difference. This means that just one standard dose of 20 milligrams is 200 million over the detected threshold for turinabol. So taking under this really isn't going to do anything. This threshold is not saying you can take under this amount because taking under that amount would do essentially nothing at all and have no effects. It's essentially just saying if we find this amount in your system, it's indicative that you likely took more in the past. Another thing I find kind of interesting, Section 2.4, Whereabouts Failure. For context, the way Article 2 works is that anything written in Article 2, if an athlete does this, it's a drug policy violation. So when I'm reading these out, it might sound kind of weird because usually there's a punishment that goes with it. Just know, anything in Section 2, if an athlete does this, it is a violation. Section 2.4 states, any combination of 3 whereabouts failures within a 12-month period as defined in the whereabouts policy developed by UFC. To understand what this policy means, we need to define whereabouts failure, and it's defined right in the UFC's appendix. The failure by any athlete to comply with the UFC's whereabout policy by failing to timely, accurately, and completely provide required whereabout information, a filing failure, and or for being unavailable for testing due to inaccurate information provided on the whereabouts filing, a missed test. So going back to Section 2.4, essentially all it means is that if you get 3 whereabouts failures in 1 year, that is a drug policy violation. Now, I can see ways this system can possibly be exploited. If we dig deeper and look into the whereabouts policy, under Section 3, Whereabouts Obligations, it states, be ready and accessible for testing during the precise times and at the precise locations specified on the athlete's whereabouts filing. Now here's where I might have to make a few assumptions. The way the whereabouts system works is that you have to submit your whereabouts filings quarterly or 4 times a year. Now, I don't know about you guys, but for me, it's going to be very difficult to accurately say where you're going to be at any time for the next quarter of a year. So the drug policy states that you should list precise times where you will know you will be in a specific location. For example, 3 a.m., you're going to be at your house most likely. But the way I see it is if I am taking steroids and I have 2 get out of jail free cards essentially, where I don't have to be in the location that I specified in my whereabouts filings, then I'm going to inaccurately fill out my precise locations. So a drug tester can try to come and find me and then I won't be there. And it's just 1 strike and I have 1 more left. And it does want you to update your information. But updating your information every second of your life kind of seems a little bit insane. And even if you don't do it, it's just 1 whereabouts failure, you still have 1 more without any punishments, even if it is intentional. Exploiting this loophole seems very doable. And I'll just let George St. Pierre explain how simple it could be to exploit the whereabouts system.
Even now, it's still easy to even now, it's...
You think so?
Yeah, man, it is.
Like, how would someone rig the system?
Okay, now, let's say I have a whereabout on my phone, okay?
Yes.
Now I'm saying it, and everybody knows that, especially the cheater, they know that. Look, I thought it through. It's not 100% sure, but let's say I want to have an injection of a product that will last in my body for 2 days or 1 day. Mm-hmm. So I know that particular day I cannot be tested because if I am, I'm screwed.
Right. So
I put my my whereabout that I'm traveling to the freaking
Antarctica,
Antarctica, or anywhere like somewhere that is
crazy,
believable.
Yeah.
And then I come back in two days after, but that substance will stay in my body for a certain period of time, but the effect of it will last maybe a month.
Yeah.
And now we talk about performance-enhancing drugs, Joe. People misunderstand. They say, oh, yeah, but it still doesn't make the difference. Yes, it does make the difference in an athlete. And the reason is, in the 80s and before, it was giving you more power, more stamina, more endurance. Now, man, with the technology, they have stuff that will change your reaction time, your confidence, your reset time. And this is a huge, huge application, man.
I think that's all of the information about exploiting the written drug policy portion. However, finders can still get around to drug tests themselves. One of the most common ways to do this is microdosing. Microdosing is when you use small doses of a banned substance on a frequent schedule, so they clear out of your system relatively quickly, but you're still getting the benefits for it. Another way to get around these tests is to use novel compounds. The way drug testing works is that the scientists have to know the exact drug they're looking for when they collect these urine and blood samples. So if you're able to slightly change a pre-existing steroid and make it essentially into a new compound that these scientists don't know to test for, they won't be detected. So a novel substance is just a slight mutation of a pre-existing substance that won't get detected. Another method of cheating, and probably the most serious, the most dangerous way of cheating, is gene doping. Gene doping is hardcore cheating, and it's when a fighter will essentially modify their own DNA to make their body naturally produce performance-enhancing substances. Now, the thing about gene doping is you need a team of scientists to do this. It's very difficult, very dangerous. The risks are high, but the rewards are very high. All it takes is one injection, and the effects can potentially last forever. It is also almost untraceable. So there's never been a confirmed case of anybody doing this in MMA, but it is possible to be done, so I still want to talk about it. So the scientists will use a harmless virus to deliver a gene into the fighter's cells. That gene can give the body signals to start producing something like EPO for endurance, or IGF-1 for recovery, or myostatin blockers for more muscle growth. I can't confirm that this has ever happened in MMA before, but it is scientifically possible, and it's a concern that people have been worried about in the sport for years. Now, the risks are serious. You can get organ failure, cancer, or death, but still, some fighters are going to attempt this because there are huge benefits and almost no risk of getting caught. And I know it sounds super futuristic and stuff, but this is possible, and gene therapy is already used in medicine to treat diseases like muscular dystrophy. Another method that fighters can use is the tainted substance excuse. This isn't a way to directly get around drug tests, but it's an excuse if you do fail. The tainted substance excuse is the excuse that I did not take that banned substance. I took a different substance, maybe an over-the-counter medicine, and it was tainted with the banned substance, so I unknowingly ingested the banned substance. Fighters use this excuse quite often because it's really hard to prove the truth, and it gets them off with a slap on the wrist. And you really don't know if they're telling the truth or not. For example, John Jones said he took an off-brand Viagra, and that was tainted, which led to him testing positive for some substance.
What did you take?
So I took an off-brand Cialis pill.
Off-brand.
It wasn't actual Cialis, but it was described to me as being a Cialis, and so I thought it was a Cialis, and I just took it. So
Why does a guy like you need Cialis?
I have a huge cock, Joe.
It's too big.
It's too big.
Now that's all I looked into for this video, so I want to thank you guys for watching. If you made it this far, this video took a lot of work. It's something that I haven't really made before, but I'd like to try to get more into this field of researching these topics in depth because I think it's fun. Not many people do it, and I try my best to get everything right. So if there are any topics you guys are interested in for me to do a deep dive on, just, hey, let me know. Got to get videos out somehow. I do appreciate it. And, seriously, let me know. Do you think that there's some conspiracy with the UFC after watching this? You should comment and let me know, because, after doing all this research, I still don't really know what conclusion I should come to. I try not to be too bad faith to the UFC. I tried to give, some reasonable excuses for why some of this stuff is from what I saw. But, I don't know. So what do you guys think? Let me know. Thank you for watching. That's about it.